Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru, and welcome to the next episode of Yogananda podcast. I'm here with Priyank. We have no Chris and no Lauren today, just the two of us. How are you doing, Priyank?
Very good. I'm very excited to do my maiden one-to-one with young Michael.
Yes, that's right.
Can be the envy of many listeners across Germanic regions.
That's right. I'm sure. Sure, that's great envy. We are in chapter 24. I become a monk of the Swami order, and we're at the end of this chapter. So before we get into it, last time there was also two people on the podcast, you and Lauren. What was that chapter about?
Yes, so that section of the chapter focused heavily on Patanjali, and we discussed a bit about his background, which is some famous mystical stories about him, and of course the famed Yoga Sutras. And then we went through SRF lesson 2 kind of thing, all that talks about the Yoga Sutras that of course Kriya does as well, but we didn't go into those lessons. But yeah, that was really good, supplementing this section where like Guruji here does it in one page, but there's a whole lesson on them pretty much. So and then we went through the complex Vedas base 6 orthodox systems and the book that was based on, which was interesting. And then we started the topic of a yogi or a swami, which is better essentially, and that kind of is spilling over into this episode, isn't it, Michael?
Yeah, it will do. I can't wait to actually re-listen to that one, because I was on vacation last week. I'm back now. I guess that's what happens in August. You go on vacation to escape the heat a bit.
Yeah.
Yep. And the way this chapter starts, start with a great sentence right off the bat. It says, there are a number of great men living today in American or European or other non-Hindu bodies who, though they may have never have heard the word yogi and swami, are yet true examples of those terms. And some names came to mind.
Well, firstly, do you know of any country that is wholly Hindu? So that would be a whole Hindu body. Do you know one, Mike?
I don't know if there's a country that is whole Hindu.
There's one.
Is that right?
Yeah. And it's not the obvious answer.
Not the obvious answer. Maybe it's like Bhutan or Nepal.
Nearly. It's Nepal. Yeah, I second guess.
Nice.
Wow, yeah. Good. Very good.
There we go. Yeah. I wonder if does that mean I don't really know where the line goes between SRF and YSS in the world, but if Nepal is Hindu and Bhutan, would they have YSS groups or SRF groups?
That's a really interesting question, isn't it? We'll have to have a look one day. That's an intriguing question.
If anyone knows. Yeah. I've obviously not been to Nepal or Bhutan. I've been to India. Yeah. Yeah. Something I will probably look up right after recording, because that's something I'm interested in.
Oh no, yeah. Kathmandu is YSS. So it's Nepal is India. It's YSS.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
It's because it's a dotted line between the two countries anyway. People just walk in and out without a visa. You can use the currency, Indian currency in Nepal, and
is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. And Nepal is very because I'd say like they've stuck to the like traditions, the Hindu traditions, much more than secular India has. So it's much more prevalent, I should say. So like it's more ingrained. Like you'll see like people are generally the more higher proportion of people that are very devotionally inclined, and you can see that from their attire, their garbs, they're like the vermilion and the marks on their foreheads, and so you'll and how much they all visit temples and how much devotion they have. So it's quite nice.
Is it like a time capsule of old India?
No, I wouldn't say that. It's just
it's
just a more concentrated devotion.
Concentrated. Okay. I like that. Yeah. So when Guruji says that there are yogi-like people all over Europe and America, he didn't say all over, but he said there are many. There's a number. He didn't even say many. He said there's a number of great men living in American and European or other non-Hindu bodies. I felt that resonated with me because I know there are people who, they just brought it with them when they lived a life, and they just had this kind of modesty or this kind of inclination to be spiritual and to be devotional. And even though I don't think it's as much cultural as it might be in India, they still behave like that, or they are very disciplined when it comes to certain things in their life. So I feel like this must be true.
Yeah, definitely. And we know, like, now we have a whole order of monastics in SRF
Hmm.
in US, right? And they
Yeah.
would probably fall into this category as well. But um, but there's so many Christian saints that and contemporary ones that Guruji mentions throughout his writings
Mhm.
and this book as well. So it's nice to hear about them, and he's kind of referencing them here.
Mhm.
Like he did a whole chapter on Luther Burbank, for example, and he
Yeah.
constantly quotes Emerson, and so yeah, it's prevalent throughout his writing, isn't it? And it's so nice that he does that, because he could have just been a
Yeah.
traditionalist, a bit prejudiced in the sense that India's the best and we've got the best religionists, but he's not in that category.
Yeah. That's why I find it so great that later in the book, like you mentioned, he will meet some Western yogis. I think he mentions uh, that Rajasi is a true Western yogi, and then when he goes through Europe, he meets Theresa Neumann, and he
Mm,
calls her a Christian saint. So whenever he was able to meet contemporary yogis in the West, he was trying to meet them, and
mm,
then write about it, and that makes it really interesting.
yeah.
Um, so he goes on, and he says he talks about their qualities, and he says there's a whole list. He says, through their disinterested service to mankind, or through their mastery over passions and thoughts, or through their single-hearted love of God, or through their great powers of concentration. They're, in a sense, yogis. So we that kind of reminded me a little bit of, he when you have gurus, and sometimes Guruji says he's an incarnation of wisdom, he's an
Mm,
incarnation of love. So he mentions here some, like, there are yogis there focused on one good quality mostly. Probably they have all of them, but there's one of them that strikes you when you meet them for the first time. And they have set themselves a goal of yoga, self-control.
mm.
Yeah. That is also something that maybe in Western culture is not so prominent, but that's something that the yoga teaches, and that makes it, I think, even a greater um, quality when you're in the West and doing this, when you have all those possibilities that you could do, but you are not.
Mm,
Yeah. Um, and then he goes on and says, these men could rise to even greater heights if they were taught the definite science of yoga, which makes possible a more conscious direction of one's mind and life. So that's like, there are those people who are ready for a a spiritual path because they live yogi like lives. And then when they meet a spiritual teacher who can teach them techniques, then the combination of that will help them progress.
Do you think that Luther Burbank falls into this category?
Oh,
Because he was obviously quite elevated in terms of his connection with Mother Nature and the plant life
yeah.
and the botanics. And then Guruji kind of came into his life, and then Guruji dedicated the whole kind of book to Luther Burbank, right? So he must have done something special when he met Guruji.
100%. I think most of the monastics that were there during Master's time, they were all like that. Even the monastics of today, right? But I mean, back then he kind of drew people to him that were yogi-like, and they joined his ashram. And I just think of a lot of the early monastics that knew Master, and then also the people that are mentioned here in this book, like a Rajarsi or like Mr. Dickinson that we're gonna talk about later. Yeah,
Gyanamata.
Gyanamata, that's right. Yeah, that's a great thought. And then Guruji goes on in the next paragraph, and he talks about how yoga is misunderstood in the West. And then he says that the people who criticize it, they are not the people who practice it. And there are some thoughtful tributes, and of those he mentions Carl Jung or Dr. C.G. Jung, as he puts it here. He was a Swiss German, so I think you would say his name is, in German they would say C.G. Jung or Carl Gustav Jung.
Nice. Yeah. In terms of the critics that have never practiced it, I think like if you think about back then, the criticisms of yoga are quite different to now. So obviously here in this, we're talking like 80 years ago. So back then there was, I think amongst the conservative religionists, there was quite a lot of suspicion, saying like, especially like Christian criticism, right? Saying if you practice yoga, that's not Christianity, and you know it's incompatible with our values. They even some now they say it's like kind of heretic, don't they? They say it's kind of heresy to practice these other techniques and practices, and they say that they dismiss back then. I think they if you read like the articles and the books and the language surrounding Indians and Hinduism, they'd often say that it's like primitive or superstitious or, you know, pagan, steeped with, you know, rituals and all that, you know, basically colonial attitude, right, on anything that's not their own. There was also like medical skepticism. I think Guruji covers this in the footnote that's coming up. Like they're saying that, oh, if you practice yoga, then you're gonna, or like breathing exercise, and you're gonna damage your health, and it's just a pseudoscience. Don't practice these things. And then the grossest form of criticism they used to have is they used to just take some of the teachings on tantra and say it's, you know, sexualization, exoticism, and it's erotica, and you know they're mixing all these things with our, you know, pure, you know, religion. So they used to have these really mishmash of criticisms, and then they just put it all together and kind of dismiss it, didn't they?
Yeah, but would you say we have come a long way since then? Probably, right?
I think so, yeah.
I think now you have so many people practicing yoga, even though one criticism that Guruji makes here, I think is still true today, that when you talk about yoga, most people still think of hatha yoga. So of the bodily exercises. However, I think there was one section that was in the book, in the autobiography, in an earlier chapter, where Guruji reacts to a comment where he says Westerners should not practice yoga because it's only meant for Hindus. And those things are not, I don't think anybody would say that today anymore. And hatha yoga has become very popular, and even some forms of meditation, and has become very normalized. Even I think within the time of my life, when I was younger, there was much more stereotypes around yoga and Eastern spirituality than today. I think today that this has become something that people see as necessary, like that everyone is a seeker. I don't think everyone is on some kind of spiritual path, but I think everyone recognizes that there is some need for this today.
And even medically, it's usually like advised, isn't it? If you're going through anxiety and things like that, they say, you know, deep breath, and they give you some techniques of there's a corporate buzzword that they Is it mindfulness?
Mindfulness.
Or is it mindfulness? So I can't remember. There's some other corporate thing. Mindfulness is very Buddhism centric, isn't it? But there's another yeah, I've forgotten. But yeah, they've added like all corporate jargon to it to make it like completely religionless kind of thing.
Yeah, because if it's religious, then it's I don't know how to say it, but then it's a bit you against you, and they want it to be universal. Maybe that's also a reason why you don't want it to be, or why many groups don't want to be associated with a religion. But at the end of the day, there's the word spirituality, which I find is universal as well, which people from all religions can kind of identify with a little bit. Yeah. So then Guruji mentions Carl Jung, and he does quote him there for 4 paragraphs, which is quite a statement where he actually recognizes his comments on yoga, and they are very positive. And in a time, I mean, this was, I would say, the 1920s, and this was a time when this was pretty groundbreaking modern ideas of Westerners about yoga.
A lot of our listeners are big fans of Carl Jung, aren't they? And Mike, I think you mentioned possibly why with Brother Bhaktananda. Do you want to just relate that thing you told me before the class?
I heard from some devotees that there used to be a spiritual psychology course in a university nearby that doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately, but some were encouraged by Brother Bhaktananda to take that, and it was very much focused on Carl Jung's psychology and spirituality and psychology, and also his ideas of archetypes, which we can go into a little bit.
Yeah. So going into Carl Jung, should we just do a bit of a background on him?
Sure.
Quickly, yeah. So he was born in 1875, and he was still one of the most influential psychologists, right? Even to this day, probably. And they say that he kind of bridged the realms of science and mysticism, as Mike was kind of alluding to. And he went through a journey of inner exploration and a lifelong quest for wholeness, as he described it. But he was born in Switzerland to a Protestant pastor, and so he was obviously surrounded by Christianity, which he became kind of disillusioned by because of the dogma, and then went into deeper kind of introspection. And then his mother, Emily, had a kind of influence because she was quite into mystical aspects of practices, and then kind of influenced Jung to be open to psychic and spiritual kind of phenomena and just the inner world. And then apparently, this is quite funny, he had a collaboration with Sigmund Freud, but they split because of diverging views around the nature of the unconscious and the role of spirituality, which obviously Freud saw as kind of neurosis, and Jung believed it was a vital expression of man's search for deeper meaning, which is quite interesting. I'm sure there's a bit of history behind that would be that I don't know about. But
somebody should write a book about it. Yeah.
Probably already has, isn't there? But sure. One of the cool things is that he kind of believed and kind of made he may have even invented the concept of synchronicity, as he described it, the meaningful coincidences that kind of defy logical explanation. And we kind of talk about synchronicity a lot in this podcast, don't we? And it's through the book. And like he kind of suggested there's a hidden order and a spiritual connection with the universe, which we experience through synchronicities. And then he was quite a universal religionist, wasn't he, in terms of saying that he didn't decline or reject any religions. He used to say they kind of all point to one truth, as it were. So yeah.
Very nice points that you made there. thank you for researching Carl Jung a little bit. I had psychology as part of my A-levels, and I kind of found out there's a trend. Like one of the subject I was researching back then was what is beauty and what is beauty's place in psychology? Where does it come from? Why do we feel, or why is that a sensation? And notice there were different schools of thought, mainly in, do you believe in a higher power that created us and created this universe, or do you not, right? And if you do, then you feel like beauty is us connecting to this higher power at the end of the day. And if it's not, then it's always either something that happened in your childhood, or something that, I don't know, pleases your body's senses or something like that, right? So, and I always, of course, felt drawn to the former, which makes much more sense, and which is really where all beauty comes from, is from our own soul, right? And the souls in other people. Yeah. So that was one thing, that Carl Jung was, of course, in the former camp, and Freud was in the latter. And Carl Jung had a few theories that were pretty interesting. They somehow gave practical value, and one of them that gets quoted often is the idea of the archetypes, that we have different archetypes in ourselves, and they show at different times, and we have to treat them well, and we have to develop them. So if we like focus on one archetype and then don't ever focus on the other, then the other one doesn't get developed, and it will show in our personality. And so he says there are core archetypes. That the first one is the self, and the self is like the overarching kind of structure. Then there is the persona, which is your mask that you're wearing when you're out in social experiences. Then there is the shadow, which is that it is hidden in you. Those are hidden aspects that you might not be always happy to show. And then inside of you, there is also the male and the female. He calls it the anima and the animus. And then beyond that, he has those archetypal figures, and he calls one of them the hero, and he's the one who goes on the quests. And then there is the wise old man or woman, who is more like the sage. Then there is the great mother, who is nurturing and creative. And then there is the trickster, who tries to disrupt and give you challenges, or other people. And then there's the inner child. I think the inner child is everyone's favorite, because that's being talked about all the time in spiritual psychology, that you want to heal your inner child. And it kind of, I feel like it gives value, because it helps you imagine how your mind works.
I really love it. I love that he kind of broke like traditions in terms of psychiatry, in terms of creating these categories and the archetypes that you mentioned, because I can imagine the debates he would have with Freud, because Freud would just reject a lot of this with me. It's just like, what are you talking about, the hero? But I think, like, on a kind of intuitional level, I think we can all see that we have little bits of this, don't we? Like the things that the different categories that you described, I feel like, oh yeah, there's a bit of me, bit of me there, bit of me there. Whereas when you think about Freud, it's all really dark stuff, isn't it? And the subconscious, and what's laying in the background of your mind, and you can't really kind of grasp that, if you know what I mean. Whereas here, it's all very personal and relatable, and it feels like you can, with this, you can. I imagine his thesis was in German. It must have been German, right? Yeah. So this is obviously English, but I feel like I can like unpack these kind of archetypes within myself and like explore them. So I feel like he's a much more relatable psychiatrist than others in the field. that are really, complex and have jargon that you difficult to understand. You need a PhD just to understand the jargon often.
That's right, yeah. And I feel like it's much more helpful when you feel like you want to heal yourself. You feel like, oh, you, for example, if you think I don't feel like um, a wise old man or something, where is the wise old man in me? And then you can do things with visualization, or if you feel like, oh, my inner child is feeling sad, you can try and try to heal yourself and project onto them. And I find this is very compatible with like a spiritual routine.
I haven't studied Carl Jung much, so this is all relatively new to me. But I imagine the shadow is, like you described it, as the hidden or the repressed or denied aspects of ourselves. So I imagine that's the subconscious that we often talk about, and I imagine the self, Guruji, the archetype of wholeness and integration, organizing principles of the psyche, is us like connecting to our super consciousness. Would that be a fair understanding of that, Mike, from your A-level psychology and philosophy integrated class?
My A-levels, I did not go that deep into Jung, but possibly the whole thing about going into higher spiritual states, I must say, is not that much discussed in the Jung literature that I read, but I could imagine so. Yeah.
And then the Great Mother is essentially divine love, as Guruji talks about, and us cultivating that, and that's I think one of the reasons why Guruji loves the divine mother aspect of God. And the wise old man would be wisdom, cosmic wisdom. So I feel like it's all there, just in slightly different language to what Guruji uses.
Yeah, and even the trickster is something that comes out every now and then. I feel like when there is a part of inside of us that feels like we're on the wrong path, then there's disruption coming out of us, even though we don't even want it.
I feel like I'm probably operating in the trickster archetype the most. I need to go to the self. Where does your consciousness predominate, Mike? Which archetype?
Your trickster is strong. I don't know. I feel like there is one. There's one, maybe the wise old man, but in a way that you are like thinking about life a lot, and there's a lot of unconscious things happening. I feel like that's the archetype that I have in me the strongest. I don't know. I would have to read up more about those archetypes and see what they actually mean. This is just a quick summary.
Yeah, it's fascinating though. Thank you for doing that.
It is, yeah. So like I said, Guruji, he quoted 4 paragraphs of Carl Jung here, and I'm just going to read the first one because it kind of gets us into it. He says, so Carl Jung writes, he says, when a religious method recommends itself as scientific, it can be certain of its public in the West. Yoga fulfills this expectation, Dr. Jung writes. Quite apart from the charm of the new and the fascination of the half understood, there is good cause for yoga to have many adherents. It offers the possibility of controllable experience and thus satisfies the scientific need for facts. And facts is under quote. And besides this, by reason of its breadth and depth, its venerable age, its doctrine and method, which include every phase of life, it promises undreamed of possible, and I love the undreamed of possibilities at the end. Yeah.
Isn't there an SRF-CD, undreamed something?
I think there is a booklet that is the introduction to SRF, and it's called Undreamed of Possibilities.
Pamphlet or something. Yeah. This is really nice, this quote, and it's a really good tribute to yoga and the efficacy of yoga. So much so that it must be appreciated in India in 1937, because the footnote writes that he attended the Indian Science Congress and then received an honorary degree from University of Calcutta. So Guruji had to rely on going to class. Carl Jung just attended and got there.
That must have been quite the time to travel to India and give a talk about yoga as a Swiss psychologist. But he was big in his time, so he was famous in his time. So, but still, very impressive that he went there. I googled the Indian Science Congress, and they had one last year still, so it still exists. I wanted to know where the one for this year is going to be, but apparently there's no date or venue.
We should attend. I'm going to try and get you on the guest list, like representing your academic institution. But
you can probably zoom in these days. Yeah.
This paragraph, I really this concept of the scientific approach being like really approachable and pleasing to the Western mind and logical mind is something that I really like, that I connect to, because I'm of that ilk as well. And I also, this is pretty much what I use when I'm trying to convince people to like drop certain habits or things that Guruji teaches us, but I can't directly quote Guruji because they're not interested in listening to a religion, but they'll listen to logic. So if you say practice deep breathing, and your anxiety and heart rate will come down, and then you'll be calmer and you'll be able to respond in a much more level-headed way, and you won't get as angry. You keep practicing, your health will get better. All these easy low-hanging fruit wins. I feel like people in my life have responded much better than just hitting them with Bhagavad Gita. God talks with Arjuna, heavy philosophy, which is, I think, or even our lessons, right? The teachings from our lessons. I think it takes a certain state to be receptive to Guruji directly, whereas this way is more appetite. That people have easier appetite for it.
Yeah, and Guruji himself, he always calls it the science of yoga, the science of Kriya Yoga. He often says that the techniques that he teaches, you try them out. If they don't work for you, you try something else. But that's how it works. It's not a dogma. It's I was going to say another sentence, but he's and I feel like that resonates here, because he's right that in the West, if you come up with religious belief, it is very, especially if it's not your own religious belief, if it's someone else's, it's very hard to find an audience. But of course, if you say this is all based on science and facts, then people are open to it. And that's what I think, that's the kind of victory of yoga so far in the West, is based on that people do it. People like papers have been written about, like you said, slowing down the breath is helping you to calm down and so on. So it's very, it's not like people wouldn't be doing it if they wouldn't think it's good for them. Yeah, and Guruji quotes more of Jung here. There's one more sentence I want to read. It says, every religious or philosophical practice means a psychological discipline, that is, a method of mental hygiene. The manifold, purely bodily procedures of yoga also mean a physiological hygiene, which is superior to ordinary gymnastics, breathing exercises, inasmuch as it is not merely mechanistic and scientific, but also philosophical in its training of the parts of the body. It unites them with the whole spirit, as is quite clear, for instance, in pranayama exercises, where prana is both the breath and the universal dynamics of the cosmos. And that hits home, because that is, he understood what pranayama is. he understood that the breath becomes mind, the breath becomes energy. And that's kind of makes me think that maybe he was practicing some kind of spiritual techniques. Maybe he learned those when he went to India.
Maybe he crossed paths with Guruji.
Possible. Yeah.
Because he's using like, I feel like the language is so similar and the concepts are so similar to what we're used to. Like even this kind of description of pranayama and prana and the link with the cosmos is just straight out of Guruji's writings, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And he makes a big deal out of that. This is not just one exercise by itself. Like Guruji has a footnote here, and he says that he's mainly talking about hatha yoga. But still, he makes a big deal of that there is a whole body of work of yoga, a whole body of science, and it's not just one individual exercise here and there that helps you a little bit, but it's all working in concert to put you on a spiritual path.
I like in the footnote that you just mentioned, I like that Guruji writes that hatha yoga is useful and produces really good results, physical results, but this branch of yoga is little used by yogis bent on spiritual liberation. And maybe this is maybe one of the reasons why Guruji and SRF and YSS don't put too much emphasis on hatha yoga. I mean, they say it's beneficial and you can do it. Like I remember, I think I related this story. I used to not do energization. I only used to do hatha yoga every day. And then when I when I applied for Kriya, the monk was like devastated. and now that now that I've been on the path of Kriya for 10-20 years, I can wholly see why, because it's like so much more subtle, isn't it? As Masvidal, when we interviewed him for the podcast, if you remember, he's in the Awake film quite often. He said that, and he's a hatha he's a hatha yoga teacher. He said, even I do hatha yoga obviously a lot, but I do hatha yoga, then I do energization, and then I do kriya, and it goes in that order. So from the gross to the most subtle and the most phenomenal aspect. So you have to do energization, and hatha yoga is useful as a preparatory step, obviously, and to overcome physical challenges and hurdles. For example, if you can't sit with your back straight, then you need to do hatha yoga, don't you? You need to do down dog and cat pose and all that stuff, because you've got to get there so you can sit comfortably and in stillness.
Yeah, especially if you want to sit on the ground, if you want to sit on the floor. It's very useful. I agree with that. I think meditation itself is some form of yoga as well. So I feel like if you the more you meditate, the easier it becomes to sit in meditation. But I think you're right. The more there are ways to make your life easier. If you do hatha yoga, I'm sure it makes your life easier. The thing about the energization exercises that's so great is I find that you just start feeling the energy in your body, and that is, I don't know, I've not done too much hatha yoga, but I don't know if that's a big part of that. Yeah. And then he has one more paragraph where he talks about that yoga is so rooted in the East, and I guess he means mostly India, and that yoga is the perfect and appropriate method of fusing body and mind together so that they form a unity, which is scarcely to be questioned. And I love that idea. That also somehow that brings a lot of things together, that your body and your mind work in synergy together. This also means you are here you're living in the now. Your mind is not somewhere else. So, and that also resonates with meditation. There's one more quote that I found by Carl Jung that I found very, very beautiful, and it's about the role of religion or religious outlook in psychology. he says, among all my patients in the second half of life, that is to say over 35, I feel like that's not where I would have cut life in half. Over 35. There has not been one whose problem in the last resort was not that of finding a religious outlook on life. It is safe to say that every one of them fell ill because he had lost that which is living, which the living religions of every age have given their followers, and none of them has really been healed who did not regain his religious outlook.
Mm.
So that's also pretty deep because it says many things. It says if you lack the connection to the higher self, you start developing psychological problems, and then those problems, they also then become physical problems. They could become physical problems. So very deep. I like it. I like all of this. I'm very, very happy. I did know that Yogananda mentioned Carl Jung in the autobiography, but I didn't know it was here, and I didn't know it was as broad. So this made me really happy when I read this.
I reckon Carl Jung I remembered what the corporate techniques were called now. It's called headspace.
Oh, yeah?
It's called headspace.
Headspace, okay. I remember there was an app that was called that.
Yeah, so my company uses it heavily and gets everyone
Oh, yeah.
to do it. And I feel like it must be inspired by some of the stuff that Carl Jung is kind of saying here. But I love this quote that you mentioned because it kind of really hits home that our true and deepest happiness lies in God, essentially, isn't it? And until you kind of center your life around that, then challenges.
Yes. Challenges and no light at the end of the tunnel somehow. Yeah. In the next paragraph, Guruji now says something very encouraging. He says that the Western day is nearing when the inner science of self-control will be found as necessary as the outer conquest of nature. So there's a lot in this sentence. There is he says that there is a focus in the West on the outer world and the maybe economy, conquest of nature sounds to me like building roads and railways and stuff like that, and making and functioning economy, but not really focusing on what's going on in yourself. And that is something that he says is going to shift. And he attributes it here. He says he calls it the atomic age, the Dwapara Yuga, right? And he says it will be sobered and broadened by the now scientifically indisputable truth that matter is in reality a concentrate of energy. So that everything we touch, everything we see around us is all just concentrated energy. Everything is made out of energy. And that is a thought that I think when he wrote this book was much less understood than it is today. I think today people wouldn't really dispute this anymore because I think most people have internalized this. But back in the day, I don't think so. And maybe that's also something that is liberating. Yeah. And then he makes some, I don't know if that's a prediction or not, but he says, lest the material atomic giant newly unleashed turn the world in mindless destruction. And then he says an interesting sentence where he says there's an indirect benefit of mankind's concern over atomic bombs because there is an increased practical interest in the science of yoga, and he describes it as a bomb-proof shelter. So I guess if you do your sadhana regularly, if you have a strong connection with your guru, then you don't worry as much about the world.
And on that topic, the first line here was that the inner science of self-control will be found necessary for the outer conquest of nature. And I kept trying to ask ChatGPT what it takes, what it interprets from this, and it kept giving pretty much only one answer, kept asking different models, and it kept saying how now we're essentially much more aware of our impact to the environment and nature, and animals and all that kind of stuff. So it thought that our inner sight and self-control will enable us essentially to be much more controlled and better for our external environment. So it was linking those. I thought it was quite an interesting analysis, but I can see that in the ascending Dwapara Yuga, as is kind of highlighted here. But the other point I wanted to make here is that he says that the human mind must liberate within itself the greater energies greater than those within stones and metals, lest the material atomic giant newly unleashed turn on the world in mindless destruction. And I thought, how other than atomic bombs, which was prevalent back then, how does that apply now? Because the Western day that is nearing when Guruji wrote this 80 years ago is now, and we are probably most concerned about AI probably right now, AI and AI misuse, and all the films are worried about what's going to happen if we unleash AI, and everyone's a bit scared, aren't they? And in a similar vein, everyone's a bit scared about synthetic biology, aren't they? Everything from cloning to all sorts of other biological innovations. So yeah, I think those are the two or three things that have come to pass now since he wrote this, other than nuclear.
Maybe that's a good sign that nobody is going around these days threatening nuclear war. Even though that's not entirely true, but it's like less of a concern now somehow than it was during the Cold War when this book was written. No, that's not true actually. No, but I guess the book was written in 1945 in the first version, and that was, I guess, that's when the Cold War started, kind of. So I feel like the bomb-proof shelter is what we should all be aiming for. And then the chapter is almost over, but there's one more footnote, because Durji says, there might be an increased practical interest in the science of yoga. And there's a footnote on the word yoga. And that's a pretty long footnote. And it's again, on that fact that when people hear yoga in the West today, they mostly associate it with hatha yoga, with those bodily exercises. And Guruji makes a point here to expound a bit on it. He mentions the Yoga Sutras by Patanjali, known as the Patanjali's aphorisms. And he mentions the word Raja Yoga or Royal Yoga. And he says that embodies a whole host of different schools of yoga. And he mentions there is one saint that is a great thinker of that school, and his name's Sadasivendra. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, Sadashivendra.
Sadashivendra. Yes, sir. And I looked him up quickly on Wikipedia, and he was a composer of Carnatic music and Advaita philosopher and Sishya of the great saint Sri Paramahamsa Saraswati, who was the 57th Shankaracharya of Mulamnaya Sarvashna, Sri Kanchi Kamakoti Pitham. And he lived in Tamil Nadu in the 15th and 16th century. Sadasiva Brahmendra, he lived in the 17th century. So not maybe 100 years after that.
Yeah, there's a couple of cool stories about him from South India. I think it's on the wiki page. So it says that apparently he was on the banks of the river Kaveri, and he was asked by some children to be taken to Madurai, which is far 100 miles away, and for a festival. And the saint asked them to close their eyes, and in a few seconds they opened them, and they were found that they were in Madurai, where there's a really famous temple, Divine Mother Temple. And then the next day, another young man who was amazed at hearing this story kind of approached him, with a kind of ulterior motive to test his powers, probably, and asked him to also take him to the festival. And then he took him there. But then when the time was to return, Sadashiva was nowhere to be found. So the youth had to make his way back on foot, 100 miles. Kind of funny story. Another time, apparently, when he was meditating at the bank of the Kaveri River, there was a sudden flood. And a few weeks later, when they were digging and clearing up, mounds of earth, their shovels struck a body, and it was him. He kind of just woke up and walked away.
I love that story. That's so cool.
So an illumined master indeed.
They all have the trickster in them, the saints. Right? A strong version of it. Yeah. So the yoga sutras, they have they contain, like it says here, the Ten Commandments of the yamas and niyamas, and then there is the what is it called? I forgot it now. He basically talks about that the Yoga Sutras they're based in the Vedas. And he says here, the cosmic order Rita that upholds the universe is not different from the moral order that rules man's destiny. He who is unwilling to observe the universal moral precepts is not seriously determined to pursue truth. So he kind of, in the sentence, he says that the yamas and niyamas, they are like basic, they are very necessary on the spiritual path. And he says in the East, they are more insisted on than in the West. I can't really judge that. I don't know, but it makes sense. I do think might have to do with the fact, because the Ten Commandments, they are a big thing in Christianity, but maybe that's to do with people not being as religious in the West as they are in the East, possibly. Yeah. And then he talks about section 3 of the Yoga Sutras, and it mentions of various yogic miraculous powers, and he calls them vibhutis and siddhis. And he says, true knowledge is always power. The path of yoga is divided into 4 stages, each with its vibhuti expression. Achieving a certain power, the yogi knows that he has successfully passed the test of one of the 4 stages. Emergence of the characteristic powers is evidence of the scientific structure of the yoga system, wherein delusive imaginations about one's spiritual progress are banished. Proof is required.
I think the 4 stages here, I think they're defined as mastery of the body and senses, mastery of the mind, mastery of time and space, and mastery of the self and liberation. So these 4 kind of stages, I think they represent the latter stages of the 8-fold Patanjali yoga path, i.e. from pranayama onwards to samadhi. So those are the 4 paths, 4 stages that he's referring to. Sorry.
Yeah. So Guruji then warns that it shouldn't be the goal, or Patanjali warns here. He said it shouldn't be the goal to have those powers, those vibhutis, but instead you should just straight for liberation. Apparently those powers, they come with liberation. So on the way you will pick them up. Very interesting.
May as well go for the highest hanging fruit, isn't it, rather than sticking near the
That is right. That is right. Even though some of those powers sound great, but they might just be a big distraction. Yeah. And then the striving yogi is therefore careful not to exercise his phenomenal powers, lest they arouse false pride and distract from entering the ultimate state of kaivalya. And kaivalya, I assume, is a state that is similar to samadhi. Just like the liberation. I looked Kaivalya up in Wikipedia, and it says Kaivalya is the ultimate goal of Ashtanga yoga and means solitude, detachment, or isolation. It is the isolation of Purusha from Prakriti and liberation from rebirth. So you don't have to go through the cycle of birth and death and birth anymore. So that is very similar to what samadhi means, nirvikalpa samadhi. And then when the yogi reaches his infinite goal, he exercises the vibhutis or refrains from exercising them just as he pleases. All his actions, miraculous or otherwise, are then performed without karmic involvement. The iron fillings of karma are attracted only where a magnet of the personal ego exists. So, yeah, that's the time. That's once you are liberated, you don't attract karma anymore. And that's the end of chapter 24. And usually at the end of the chapter, we do reflections. What do we think of chapter 24? I become a monk in the Swami order.
This last section was exceptionally heavy, wasn't it? These last two episodes, made more so by Carl Jung and our unraveling of that. But overall, I think this chapter started off very personal. I think it was this moment is probably one of the most intimate moments of Guruji's life, and he made it that it was also intimate for us in this podcast because had two one-to-ones for this podcast, Lauren and myself last week, and Mike and myself.
You were in both of them.
Yeah. The common denominator. But I really loved the simplicity of his initiation and the lack of ritual or pomp, and Sri Yukteswara's kind of preference for that, and how he kind of insinuates that that's kind of how we should also live our lives, and that's pretty much how SRF is, isn't it? Very, very minimalistic in terms of its ritual, which I really like to reflect on during this podcast. And then I also liked going through Shankaracharya and Patanjali as well, and some of their stories and the famous chant "I am He," and of course diving deep into the Eightfold Path once but twice. And I think it was really needed because I think you have to kind of study some of that stuff with a pen and paper and like get it clear in your mind what the difference is between each of the eightfolds, Ashtanga paths, because Guruji mentions it in lesson 2 and the Kriya lesson, so it's got to be important, right? I think we've got to see like how we're making progress on those various elements, from pranayama to pratyahara to dharana to dhyana to samadhi. I think if we see the progress we're making, we'll get more and more dedicated to achieving those.
100%. Yeah, for me, this chapter was also, like you said, it was very touching how he interacted with Sri Yukteswara in the beginning, and even Sri Yukteswara asked him if he's sure he doesn't want a family and stuff like that, and he was 100% sure. I want to be a swami. I want to be in your ashram, Sri Yukteswara. And it was full of like those kind of moments that there are those they said very loving things to each other just before the ceremony, where you kind of felt that over the years, him being in the hermitage, I think Guruji mentioned at some point that he was like, so like you go to the dentist and he pulled every sick tooth out of your jaw, and they had come to this strong harmony at this point now, where you remember a few chapters before, Guruji just left the ashram and went to the Himalayas, and then look where they have come now. Yeah. And then, like you said, then the second half of the chapter is pretty deep and goes more into the science of yoga, which is, like you said, it's pretty important to know some of the theory. And like I said, I was pretty happy that he mentioned Carl Jung here, and even to that extent. And I was happy to when I saw I'm doing the chapter where it's all about Carl Jung. I was pretty happy to just research this.
I was happy too, Mike, because it would have taken me a long time to do Carl Jung. But you already knew a little bit about him, so that was good.
Yeah. And then the next thing to do is look forward to chapter 25. Is that right?
Yeah, brother Ananta and sister Nalini.
Yeah, that's a beautiful one.
Yeah, very short, but we'll hopefully do it some justice.
Yeah. All right. Then I want to thank the viewers and the listeners, and thank you, Priyank. Jai Guru.
Thank you very much. Jai Guru.